Silicon Slope Summit is Utah's original and longest-running grassroots tech event. It provides entrepreneurs, startups, and leaders the resources and community they need to succeed. With the pandemic behind us, we're excited to bring Silicon Slope Summit back to its original January dates in conjunction with the Sundance Film Festival. We have some unbelievable news. Silicon Slope Summit is free for all Utahns for the first time ever. You heard that right. Silicon Slope Summit is now free. For those looking for an upgraded experience, we are also offering VIP tickets for just $95. Thanks to our partners, sponsors, and government leaders, Silicon Slope Summit is the most accessible tech and startup event in the world. Summit will be hosted in multiple locations throughout the week in both Utah and Salt Lake Valley. There will also be a Startup Alley at Summit this year, where startups and entrepreneurs can meet with investors from around the world to pitch their ideas, receive feedback, and promote what they're building. Of course, we'll be bringing in world-class leaders and speakers, as we have in the past, but we'll also be hosting specific tracks and bringing attendees together for curated networking in a way never done before. You don't want to miss this year's summit. To register, buy VIP tickets, learn about sponsorship, and apply for your startup to be part of Startup Alley, go to siliconslopes.com/summit.
Okay, Clint, I brought you something.
Okay.
This is the DEI Pulse Check.
Oh, cool.
It just got released today. So I literally sent it out today.
I got it.
Yeah, you probably got my email,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, I was excited. I was like, this will be great to talk about because it's new. Nobody's seen it yet. I mean, they saw the first version of it in March, which I did right after the DEI legislation came down, right? So we wanted to get a sense of, okay, what are people thinking? What are they worried about? How are they thinking about changing things? Do you care that we totally just jumped right in?
Let's go. No, I love. Are you kidding?
You know me well enough that it's like we can just
should absolutely
past the
jump
chit
in.
chat, right?
Yeah. Let's get past that stuff.
And so I was like, well, let's do a 6-month update because the HB 261 goes into effect in the summer in July, right? And so everybody was making shifts or whatever it was that they were deciding to do, and so I thought it'd be great to do a 6-month and just kind of see what happened. Where are we at? And I don't know that I'll do it every 6 months because it's kind of like pulling teeth to get people to respond to a survey. You know how that goes.
Oh, for sure.
But we did get a good set of data. So I was thrilled and it's really, really fascinating.
What does it say? Tell us.
Well, this one, the first one was more about sentiments, like, negative sentiment and things like that. What might be changing. On this one, I asked some folks, okay, so if we were to do this again, what would be useful? They said, could you add some more benchmarks? Things like budget benchmarks, right? Based on revenue and size and things like that. So if I'm a leader, I can say, okay, where's my organization at? And we know that there's varying levels of interest and commitment to DEI. So, this is simply meant to surface data. It's not meant to tell anybody what to do, but just say, hey, here is some information we were able to gather from a good set of leaders that are generally committed to DEI. And here's what they're doing and here's what they're spending. And we also measured or asked which companies are headquartered outside of Utah to see, is there an overwhelming amount of those type of companies that are doing DEI and not the Utah, but it's pretty balanced actually. So, I love data. And one of the reasons why is we can let ourselves get so, I guess, swept up in the stories and the fear or whatever. Yeah. And, I just find that data is a useful tool to kind of demystify what's really happening. So for example, I was at a leadership training session just a week ago talking about DEI. And somebody said, well, now that we're no longer allowed to do DEI in our companies. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. No, there's a lot of, not that much has changed, in terms of private companies. I mean, obviously the public, sector is being affected quite heavily, but I thought, oh no, see, that's why we've got to be so careful. Because all of these misperceptions can happen. And that's why I love having data.
Yeah. I've been on 2 college campuses recently, and both staff of the college, the universities, asked me, what's going on with DEI in tech? Because they're thinking about it a lot at the university level.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer for them. So I'm sure they'll watch this. Tell us what's going on at DEI in tech.
It's right here.
Sarah.
Well, it's not just tech, actually. It's I did it very cross-sector. So there's 5 main sectors that we profiled because we know different sectors such as higher ed, right, is being impacted very differently than, say, corporate. So corporate was one big bucket, nonprofit, higher ed, government, and then public ed. Very few responses from public ed in the first one anyway.
Interesting.
It's not really the reach that we have, and they do things a little differently. But there was a huge drop off from higher ed and government responses in the second one. And so not surprising, even though it's an anonymous survey, I think the apprehension is there. I think our higher ed employees are still feeling like they have to walk on eggshells, and they.
Yeah, that was the sense I got, which forgive me, I actually don't understand what that is. I'm sure that something happened that I've forgotten about, but why would you say that there's been a drop off of government and higher ed? What has happened in that world that would make it so that they're walking on eggshells? Yeah,
that's a great question. Let's just kind of back up and remind everybody what happened. So in 2023, there was a bill that came down, and the title of that bill was Prohibiting DEI in Higher Education. So, wow, we were like, what? Like a complete ban? What is this? And that got everybody really, really concerned. And it caused so much concern that during the hearing, President Randall from the University of Utah said, hey, can you slow down here, right? There's so much tied to accreditation, so much tied to our systems. All of these things that just kind of, passing a bill this quickly is just, we got to think about this and be very thoughtful. So they took it over the interim session to the next year. They said, okay, we agree to study it. Then at the beginning of this last session, they, I think to the surprise of many people, basically said, okay, well, now it's not just higher education, it's sweeping. We're going to cover government, public offices, and public education. And everybody's like, whoa, this is everything in public, basically, public offices. And it came very quickly. It was, and I want to talk about a part specifically around our businesses, because, I was one of those that spent time with the bill sponsor saying, tell me about this. I've got, I tend to represent business leaders who are trying to build high-performing cultures in their organizations. So I want to understand how that impacts us. And they would say, oh, it doesn't touch you at all. And that's why I think this data is so important, because I want to understand, well, okay, I get that you don't think there's any legislated impacts, but there's maybe some unintended impacts that you haven't really fully considered. And, for those of us who have been around for a very long time, we understand the deep connection between higher ed and our growing business economy, right? You can't really separate the two. It's not like, one doesn't operate in a bubble with the other, especially as you get more sophisticated. I think when you're early in your career, you can sort of ignore what's going on in the larger economy. But once you get in those, positions of influence, it's really hard to disconnect from the decisions that these leaders are making over here and these leaders and these leaders. So, I didn't really believe them. I was like, well, I guess we'll see, and let's go measure it. Let's ask people and measure and see if we can see what the real impacts are. And the reality is with the legislation, as well as some of the judicial decisions that are coming down, even though it's happening in higher ed, people aren't dumb, and they're like, oh, well, what do we need to be aware of? And of course, as in all organizations, it's about risk tolerance, right? What's our risk tolerance, and how committed are we, and all of those factors. So there's not one right way to handle and address it. But
wait, real quick, did that legislation pass? We should probably explain what happened.
There was actually 3 bills that were. There was 2 that passed really quickly. There was they call it the higher ed bill, but it was also public offices and public education. Okay. Very big and sweeping. Okay. So that one passed. And then there was another bill called HB 111 that did attempt to legislate within more private sectors around DEI training. And that bill did not make it past Senate committee. And then,
why do they think they even have the power to do that constitutionally? That's weird.
Well, what do you mean constitutionally?
How could they tell a private business what they can train on and not train on?
Well, I mean, you can legislate anything in theory, right?
Sure.
But I don't know if it's the constitutionality so much.
Is that a First Amendment thing?
No,
Really?
not necessarily.
Interesting.
No, because you can't, act obscenely in private business, right? You can say, we do, when you have policies, your policy manual, you can say these are the behaviors that are not appropriate. You can fire people based on obscenities or what, obscene behavior or whatever. And you could argue, well, that's First Amendment. And if there's boundaries to First Amendment, right? If I threaten someone, right? So not anything goes in private business, right? I think
but those are extreme examples compared to
exactly.
just a training.
Exactly. And I mean, probably better than anyone because you've talked to so many entrepreneurs in Utah that Utah is a state that generally our legislators are generally not in businesses telling them what to do, right? And so that was also a pretty big departure from, and it was on something like training. Like it's like, okay, legislature, if you're gonna come in and get involved in something, why training? And so it's really,
that's
it was
really
one
weird.
of those that felt very much like a message bill because it was kind of like, okay, but why? I think the positive thing here is when I look at the legislation, it's not that my clients had to change anything they were doing, right? So the bigger concern is like the example I said before, we hear in the news there's this anti-DEI law and then people assume, oh, well, we can't do anything in DEI, right? And I think that's the bigger concern for me is it's just a little bit harder, not a little bit, a lot harder to be able to say to people like, yeah, you're actually fine. Like, there's these guardrails and we're going to steer clear of it. But gosh, there's lots of ways to do DEI, right?
Yeah.
The things they're legislating against are one way to do DEI. There's lots of other ways. And I think it's making sure just in the free market space that people have those options available to them. And so I think that's the unfortunate is it creates confusion, right? And it doesn't really allow the free market to say, well, actually, this is the better way to go. The third bill that I'm not going to talk about today is the transgender bathroom bill. So that was the other one that happened right at the beginning of the session.
Yeah, I remember that.
So so those are kind of the three main bills. And then, you never know what's going to happen. Things are in flux and this is, election year and there's just a lot going on. But I wanted to talk about one area of the bill that's still in law, HB 261. So, Clint, you've been involved in a lot of public-private partnerships, right? So when I say that to you, you know exactly what I mean, right? Can you define it for your audience?
It's just like you working with government and business. So it's industry and the public sector working together is how I've normally thought of it.
Yeah. And some of those have been in higher ed, right? With talent pipelines and talent pathways. I mean, think about how many times Pluralsight has done, a private public partnership with, a K-12 or
it's usually with an higher educational institution.
Yeah, or I've done ones with where it's more of an ecosystem collaborative of partners, and some of them are nonprofits, some are state entities. Like you might, ask GoEd to be involved in something, and and so, but those types of partnerships are actually one of Utah's secret sauces, right? We're very good at that. We come together very quickly when there's a really important thing to do. We don't stay siloed, right? We can reach out to GoEd, we can reach out to higher ed, we can reach out to K-12. We know who to reach out to and say, hey, let's partner around this important thing. I can't do this part, but can you do this part? And then can you do this part, right? Okay, so that is just a very normal way that we build our ecosystem here.
Very collaborative.
So what's kind of shocking is that in the law, nobody actually noticed this until I brought it up, which is kind of scary if you think about it. It's kind of scary. But even the business leaders who were aware, they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. And I was like, yeah, we need, like, they're really trying to be so far reaching. Okay, so there's this one section that says, like, if a higher ed employee engages in any like program, event, it's something like that related to personal identity, that's prohibited.
Wait.
Any program, event, there's the kind of a laundry list of things.
Any program or event that's around personal identity.
Yeah.
So like a pride parade is like one of the first, they couldn't do that.
How about a women's event?
They can't do a women's and business
That's what
event.
the law says.
They can't. Yeah, that's
what the law literally says. That's why I'm like, hey, friends, and then think about all of the recruiting efforts, all of the relationships business have built with higher ed. And if I say, hey, I would love to talk to, so I've done a lot of work in STEM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Women engineers. I'm an engineer. That is just an underrepresented group. So based on the law, if a business says, hey, engineering department, I'd love to do a lunch and learn for women engineers. And I'd love to bring lunch and talk to them about careers and talk to them about opportunities. That's literally covered by the language, right? Now, is anyone going to enforce it? I have no idea. But the point is that the higher ed employees' behavior is being covered by that language, not the private business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm a private business and I don't know about that, and maybe there's a higher ed person that says, actually, we can't do that anymore. Like, that's weird and awkward, right? I'm going to be like, why? I'm trying to recruit. I'm trying to broaden my talent pool. Like, yes, I'm hiring men, but I also want to be able to reach and, build relationships with, and we know from lots of research that industry relationship being built mid-degree, it's really powerful, right? And that's also a time when those type of relationships will keep women in STEM degrees because they will opt out because of, they're isolated or for many other reasons. But that's a critical time. So now we've written into law something that creates a lot more friction for those kind of interactions.
Well, again, you're limiting what a person can do. Is this like in their professional capacity, or they can't do it even like, say they just attend, they don't organize that event, but they attend that type of an event?
Well, I think as in their personal capacity, they can do anything. The government can't do that, but an employee. So like let's say.
This is so weird. This is weird.
Yeah. And that's why I'm like, hey, is anybody paying attention? Because very very strategically, they renamed the bill Equal Opportunity. Yeah. Right. And so then everybody's like, oh, okay, good. They made it better. And then they didn't even read. I don't think I'm willing to bet most people didn't actually read the language. I'm a former lawyer, so I'm sitting there reading it being like, all right, let's see what this says. Yeah. Right. And my alarm bells went off because for those who have actually been involved in building these public-private partnerships and they know how deeply important these relationships are with our higher ed universities, I would be really sad if I was a higher ed institution saying, gosh, now there's some additional barriers when we need industry so much. Like, think about how all the times higher ed's just begging industry to get involved and be on advisory boards and come and speak, all those things, right? And I just thought, gosh, what a shame that it's literally to that micro level. Yeah. Again, would anyone actually enforce that? I don't know, but gosh, wouldn't it be a shame if they actually did?
Well, what would enforcing it even look like?
I have no idea.
They
but
come in and arrest the.
I don't know. See, that's the thing, and
it all seems like honestly, it seems completely unenforceable and entirely like a message.
But that's just one little example. That's just one little example. But clearly, there's something where it did cause all of the higher ed institutions to revamp over the summer.
Yeah.
Like they did. They didn't sit there and say, gosh, I don't know, try to come. No, they actually went for, like the Women's Center got closed down at the University of Utah. The Women's Center has been there for 58 years, right? Literally. Like,
what are they calling it now? Just the center?
I think it's all being under the Student Success Center or something. I don't know specifically, but I mean, that feels drastic to me. So no, I do think higher ed's taking it seriously.
I do too.
Right?
I think you're right about that.
I do think there's something that is, whether it's funding or something, I don't know, that is of big enough concern that it is compelling them to comply.
Our higher education institutions, aside from BYU, take a lot of money from the state every year.
Sure.
They're going up there a lot.
Yeah.
And so I imagine that they are the one group that would listen to what those guys have to say.
Yeah.
Probably more than any other.
Yeah. And I feel for higher ed, and I'm not criticizing them for complying at all. I mean, it's the law, but all I'm saying is that the intended, because that is the language of the law, and the unintended impacts are much more far reaching than just affecting public areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it trickles down into our talent pipeline, into our ability to hire, into our ability to recruit. And so that's why I'm so glad to be able to talk about this on this show, because our business leaders, not many of us are actually watching what's happening to public law, right?
Yeah,
None of us are experts. We're like, oh, that's government. I am trying to run a business here, right? And so I think we think that, oh, it's some law about higher ed, public ed, okay. And then we just kind of, move on. There was very little business. There were very few business leaders reaching out to legislators about this. And that really, really concerned me, especially when it's so clear that there's actually language in it. And I think that what it taught me was that just we have to be more aware of what's happening, because there are things happening in, other sectors of legislation that impact business. And sometimes we think, oh yeah, nothing will touch us. And it is. And for talent, I mean, we're in kind of a weird, interesting layoff phase, right? There's lots of talent available, but how many decades have we been struggling to find talent?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And hopefully the economy will rebound, and we'll probably be in that situation again. And, and I know we've been in the trenches, really trying to grow the talent pipeline. And I worry that so much of that work that we've done for decades, and, Clint, I'm talking to you because we were side by side, right?
Yeah.
Elbow to elbow in tech and all of those things. And tech's just one sector. I mean, I just use it as an example because
of course,
you and I have this history and background of seeing this massive transformation, this evolution. The idea of being a woman in tech is not an anomaly anymore, right?
Yeah.
We want to actually do that for all sectors where, and these partnerships have been such an important part of that. So thanks for letting me just express these concerns. And I just hope business leaders just understand what's going on. I'm not trying to be like what do you call that? The kid who cries wolf or anything like that. But the impacts are measured. They're, and
yeah. So
I'm not making this up, I guess.
No. Yeah. Of course not. Why do you think there were so few business leaders who spoke out?
There's this interesting phenomenon where I think DEI has been messaged to be an issue about people of color and LGBTQ. And so I think a lot of leaders, when they hear that, they actually don't think, oh, that might be me. Let's say I'm a woman, right? Maybe a white woman. I was raised by white people, so I'm white and Asian, okay? But if I'm not paying attention, and I've come to see DEI as something we do for our multicultural community, something we do for LGBTQ, but it's not really something that affects me day to day. And then if I'm not paying attention, guess what happens? They close the women's success centers. And I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute,
Yeah.
Boulder Way Forward, all these things, like we're supposed to be a state that cares about women. And so I think it's an important lesson to learn that DEI is everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's what happens to one community, we got to pay attention because it could happen to you too. And I think somehow we feel like we must be immune or something. I don't know. I just think that, the communities of color showed up in spades, right? But it's not their job to fight this battle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we all stand to benefit by making sure that there's specialized services so that students could succeed. How many single women, single mothers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we've been talking about for so long, are women returning to the workplace after, after they raise children and all of these different pathways. So hopefully they can get that support from somewhere. I don't know where. They'll get it.
Well, it might be from us, right? Like the private sector at this point, which is really odd, probably not a good solution long term. I hear what you're saying there.
Well, are we okay shifting the burden to the private sector? Is that the private sector's burden?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it might be right now.
Well, it's kind of like, as an example, you're trying to solve the student debt problem.
Yeah.
Is that private businesses' problem to solve the student debt or the student lunch debt?
That's a great example.
Do you see what I'm saying?
That's a great example.
But now it's private business jumping in saying, oh my gosh, right? And so we see that too often, right, Clint? We see it too often where it's like, well, we're going to eliminate this from public, but private, if you care enough about it, do something about it.
Isn't that
and
wild?
We're doers because we are entrepreneurs. We're doers, right? We know how to solve problems. But I think the important thing is that we solve them together as a whole ecosystem, that we're working together, that we're not expecting one group to solve it. And I think what I'd love to see is business leaders more active in working with different groups so that our voice is there, but we're not like the only voice. I'm not saying, okay, private business, you're the only ones that can solve this. Not at all. But we need to be part of the conversation. And too often there's such a lack of business leader voices on these type of issues.
Yeah.
I'd like to see more.
Particularly on Capitol Hill. I think you're exactly right there. Historically, our community has avoided that and probably avoided it intentionally, right? Because there's some pitfalls that come with that. And maybe some people have scars and various things from getting, going up there and doing whatever, right?
Sure.
And so,
but I think that's a relationship building that needs to still happen. Right?
It does seem like we've matured as a community where you can't actually do that anymore, even if you want to.
Yeah.
We could do that in 2013. It's like we're going to build a thing and, we'll see in 10 years.
Yeah.
But now here we are 10 years later. I think we have to do it.
Well, it's so interesting that with these private partnerships that we've done, we did come together. We did have these conversations and we said, oh my gosh, we all connected the dots and okay, let's make this happen. So why can't we do that in other areas, right?
Yeah. And
come together. I think business is happy to play their part, right? But I do get a little concerned when it's like is private and nonprofit going to be the only groups that keep DEI top of mind? Is it our job, right? I mean, I'm happy that it's still really strong. I've got some really cool. Let me just show you. I can't show these on the things, but if you look at, I call them my culture drivers. I wish I had this all tabbed and pretty for you.
No, you're great. You just printed it today.
I did. Look how pretty these colors are.
Yeah, that's very cool.
I know. Okay. But if you look at this, Clint, this is, I didn't mean to bump that, but this is just how engaged is your organization in DEI, right? This top row is corporate.
Okay.
And there's still a lot of high engagement, right? And so you see a drop off in some of the other sectors.
Yeah.
But we still have really high engagement. It's really cool to see. And budgets are still increasing, and a lot of people are reporting we're increasing efforts. And so it's not, it's definitely not dying like some people assume. So I think that's the good news.
Let me ask you this. Is it worth looking at how we even got here? Like, how did we get to the point where our state legislature, and by the way, this is a national issue.
Right.
Right. Like I imagine, I don't know this, but I imagine other state legislatures did something similar. How did we get to that point? That feels like it feels like a symptom, not the cause.
Yeah, I agree. I think we all know that the shifts in the social changes have created discomfort, right, for folks. And I think knowing how to solve it has been kind of the conundrum. But I actually included a really interesting quote. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
I actually pulled just a few quotes and maintained anonymity, of course, because I don't know who submitted these quotes, but I thought it was very insightful. And I do think, DEI leaders are thinking about like, okay, how do we need to evolve? How do we, right? Apparently something went wrong where there's this, and we can go to as deep deep into political theory as you want, but I am not a political expert. So I am not going to,
sure. Yeah.
what's the root of all of this legislation? Yeah. But I thought it was really interesting, this quote. They said, I was against this a year ago, but the more I think about it, the more I think that having a space for white men is important. I think having a safe space for men to discuss things like toxic masculinity, expressing emotions, being a man who is not an alpha male, empathy, etc., would be beneficial to everyone. Right? And, when you think about like these success centers that were done away with, I sometimes wonder like, okay, so if we were worried about, first generation rural white males, let's create a center for them. Yeah. Let's give them resources. Let's do what we would do with any other community that is underserved and under-resourced, right? I feel like there was kind of a lack of creativity. Like if the real problem is that you're worried that some people are not getting, but others are, then let's figure out how to distribute the wealth, right? Because that is equity right there. And it shouldn't only go to people of color. It should go to other communities that we know from a data-driven standpoint. For example, men are not succeeding at the rates of women in college anymore, right? We need to focus on them.
Yeah.
Right. What do we do? How do we help them? Do we create a men's success center? Like those sort of things, I think the lack of creativity and innovation is what strikes me. And instead saying, well, we're going to make sure you don't get any. And then now this community that actually does need help, they can't get it either.
Yeah. Because
guess what? We've said, nope, your personal identity, sorry. And it's a shame too, because those people, they need it. And it just strikes me that there's so many ways to solve this, but we didn't bring people together to actually solve it, or talk about it in a meaningful way.
Well, there's no nuance in this conversation. There's like, it's either like one way or another.
Yeah.
And it really has become political in a way that actually surprised me because it becomes such a huge talking point in in the tech community. DEI. I mean, we've been hearing this for years.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, front page, what our main leaders are talking about and kind of fighting over. And there really is kind of no nuance or grappling with what DEI even means. This is kind of I go back to this a lot. I think if we said DEI to 10 different people, we'd get 10 different answers.
Sure.
Or like what it even means.
Mm-hmm.
And because I don't think, if you brought it out and be like, hey, we need more diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, diversity of voices, diversity of types of people, all this type of stuff. I think I was like, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
We need to include as many people as possible. Yeah, that sounds good. I do think it is that E word. I do think it's the E still that people need to get, that there's probably, I honestly think you're only fighting over that word. Not you. But I think the culture and the public is only fighting over that word.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because I think I would say the in my observation, the good thing about this this time period is that I do think DEI leaders have had to pause and realize the way that things are being communicated, taught, discussed, clearly something's not quite working. And I build on learning theory a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like, how do you help bring understanding? It's not always about forcing people to jump over this, academic definition that they don't feel applies to them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you've already created this like division in the sense of if you give a definition that doesn't actually apply to them, then I'm already disconnected.
Mm-hmm.
If you give people a definition where they can see themselves in that definition, then I'm like, oh, okay, I get it, right? And that happens a lot when I'm leading strategy sessions in DEI, right? They'll be like, oh my gosh, I've never understood it that way. And I do think that it has been a good thing to ask DEI leaders to try to innovate, right? Try to evolve, try to be more inclusive in their approaches. And I actually don't think that's a bad thing because I think that just as in all things, right? The willingness to change, to learn, to grow. DEI leaders are not exempt, right? We are not exempt. We don't have everything nailed either. And a lot of us are learning this on the job.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think, from where I sit, it's been super painful, but not the worst thing in the world. I think a lot of us have grown from it. I think the thing I would like is for people to have the opportunity to see the new evolutions.
Yeah.
Rather than just say, nope, it's, you know what I mean? Because I think they don't know that there are new approaches, new ways of doing it. And they're still stuck in this version that they think is DEI. And just whatever you're going to tell me about DEI, well, that's that.
Yeah.
And it's actually not. And so,
Yeah, I think they go to like, you remember that case that the Supreme Court decided on, like Harvard had been excluding the Asian population, or what?
They
You
hadn't
know
been
better than me.
excluding it, but the East Asians had been their numbers actually were really good on admissions. So I think the crux of it was, are Asians a minority, underserved population anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you take a data-driven approach, the challenge is on the nuances, right? Asia,
there's no nuance.
Is 26 different countries at least, right? So that, like, the lack of the nuance, a Southeast Asian is not the same as, a Japanese or Korean person, and so, or Indian, right? I mean, there's so many nuances in what Asia is, or some of the Middle East is considered Asia too. So, to your point, what a lack of nuance.
Yeah.
Right. And the way we're tracking right now with the census and government, data doesn't really allow for those nuances either.
Well, we're very divided as a country, and it's starting to seep into everything, every aspect of our life. Again, in 2012, I don't ever remember talking politics with anyone.
Yeah.
In the tech community, ever. Like, not even like, obviously we would never do it on stage but even like I never even thought about it. It was this crazy thing. Now it's like everybody's walking around with like a flag of who they represent, who they support. And it's really fascinating that has infiltrated our community the same as it is the rest of the world. That tells you like we're very, very divided. And you say something like DEI, which is getting defined by both sides, and both definitions are entirely different.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like the definitions are so like we're not even having the same conversation. That's what I mean by like the one side is like, hey, you want equity, so we all have the equal outcomes, and and so we don't like that. And the other one's like, we think that it means equality and equality of opportunity, and like you're not having it's not even the same thing.
Not even the same. And I've seen certain politicians use totally different definitions depending on the audience they're talking to.
Of course.
Right? They know that there's different ways that you can talk about something. And I mean, that's unfortunate. I think at the end of the day, if we're talking about like business, right? And the and the cultures that we're trying to build, it's really about the concepts and principles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are times when I've worked with clients and said, okay, let's do this work, but I'm going to actually challenge you not to use those words, right? Again, do we know what those definitions are? So what is it that we need to do then? Well, we need to define, let's say we believe in diversity. You can't just say that. You have to say, what's the behavior I'm expecting to see then if we believe that diversity is really important?
Mm-hmm.
That's almost more important than saying we believe in diversity.
Mm-hmm.
So you can usually articulate those behaviors without ever using the words DE and I. It's actually really fun exercise. So I was a patent attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have this phrase, you can be your own lexicographer. So a patent attorney has actually, I know this is going to break your brain on some stereotypes, but there's actually quite a bit of creativity allowed for a patent attorney. They have to draft their claims, of course, according to the law, but I can describe an invention any way I want. As long as somebody of skill in the art can understand what I'm describing, right? And so I will tell people, look, you don't have to ever use the words DE and I. I mean, it's good to be able to point that out and be able to observe for it in action and be able to say, see that program you built? It had a lot of great equity, right? Like some of the examples we talked about before, right? But in theory, you should actually be able to see it in action and describe it. And I've gone into some clients and done some discovery where, they're like, oh my gosh, we just started DEI. And I'm like, I actually learned about this thing that you've been doing. And did you know that's actually diversity, equity, and inclusion? You've already been doing it. You're just not calling it that. And you don't have to call it that. But the way that you just made that business decision has fairness, right? It has many pathways, access, all of those things. Like, we are not a society that has just all of a sudden discovered DEI. We've actually been doing it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
We just, need to get better at spotting it and then describing it for folks to say, like, here, let me just give you a little example. Back when Tara Spalding was running the Boom Startup program, and she was doing that entrepreneurship program, she redesigned it. And she was describing to me how she had redesigned it to open the gate for more women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs from different backgrounds and things like that. And I hadn't sat down and trained her on DEI or anything like that, but she's describing the way that she redesigned it. And I was like, oh my gosh, Tara, there is so much equity that has been authentically, naturally built into your program. Like, I was like, and she's going to get the results. The gate's going to be wider, right? But she didn't call it her diversity, equity, and inclusion program. It's just her entrepreneurship, accelerator program. That's all it is. And she doesn't have to call it that. But like, for her to understand and for me to let her know you understood those concepts innately. And then you used it to redesign something that's going to create a lot of value for your program, as well as for those entrepreneurs that are going to come in, right? This win-win, the mutual win-win, right? Are all of the entrepreneurs going to be wildly successful? No, because it's not equal outcomes, right? But they're going to all have equal access to opportunity.
Yeah.
So that, I love these concrete examples because we get so afraid of DE&I that I'm just like, but why?
Yeah.
Like, what she redesigned was amazing and thought leadership. And she wasn't doing it because I have to do DEI, right? She wasn't like all sulky about it or anything. It was energizing to her, right? She thought she was being innovative, and she was. Because when we're doing it the right way, it does drive innovation. It drives new ideas. And like, okay, there's a different way I can do this.
Yeah.
Right? That actually can reach more people.
Yeah. It's about actually having the same conversation.
Yeah.
Rather than having two completely separate conversations, which is what I think is happening there again. And I think a lot of it is around the E thing, which you just mentioned. But like, it doesn't make a ton of sense why we would have completely different conversations and completely different definitions of what any of this is.
Yeah.
And then like start passing laws either way. Either way, it wouldn't make a lot of sense until we can have the same conversation. Something that I found interesting is I've been interviewing a lot of CEOs for this and CEO.com and various things. And a lot of them are talking about how they are now being asked to weigh in on things outside of what they do with their company, right? Like outside of even their own industry. They're being asked now to talk about society and things that are happening in the world in a way, and in the culture in a way that they never had been asked to before. And I think a lot of them are still trying to figure out how to navigate that because they don't know. And I think back to like the question I asked a little bit ago, which is like, why do we think business leaders didn't stand up? I don't know that they're hesitant, or I don't know that they're not hesitant. I don't think they know how.
Right. When and how, right? When should I speak up? How should I speak up? And, everybody's got to make that decision for themselves. But, there's a lot of people, if someone actually cares about an issue, there's plenty of people to guide them. For example, the Salt Lake Chamber, right? The very strong policy team, right? They're interacting with legislators all the time. You don't have to do it alone. Right, you can work with people who are very skilled. There's a lot of lobbyists, all that things, and a lot of larger companies have government relationships experts and things like that. So certainly, I don't think anyone is expected to do this alone. But I think, I guess the question I have for you is: did they embrace it, or were they concerned? They're like, wow, I'm being asked all these things, or they're like, oh my gosh, they want me to comment on everything because I run a really large company. Is it that they're a little?
Well, I think a lot of them did what the Coinbase CEO did. Did you see, like, hey, we're not talking about politics and work anymore, but like Brian Armstrong, he announced this like 2 years ago, and it was very controversial. Then Basecamp did something similar. Where they're like, we're not talking about their answer is like, well, let's just get it completely out of the conversation, out of the business, because this is not what we do here as a company.
Right.
So you got that wing of it. And then you've got like on either side, you could point to like a Reid Hoffman, who is very kind of left wing, or you could look at like an Elon, who is very engaged too. And I think like the Brian Armstrongs and the Basecamp CEOs of the world are seeing Elon and Reid Hoffman and Mark Cuban and all these people being defined by their political viewpoints. Like I really do think, like, do you think like if Mark Cuban, do you think of him as the Shark Tank guy, or as like the surrogate for Kamala Harris right now, or something, and Elon, do you think of him as like Tesla, or do you think of his like tweets and him supporting Trump? Like it really is like, and I think these like the folks who are like, we're just building companies, get nervous. Like we don't want to be defined by what our political views are. So we're not even going to state them, and we're shutting down the whole conversation. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I think there's a couple different approaches, look, if you're a CEO that really has a strong feeling for being out there and engaged in these conversations, you can do that with or without your company. Like certainly I think those type of CEOs are smart enough to know that their voice will have ripple effects for perceptions on their company, for sure, right? They can't, I mean, they're not idiots, right? But secondly, for those ones, let me just address the ones that might be more concerned, right? They're not sure if they should put themselves out there, or how do I do this? Or do I have to write a statement on everything, right? For those folks, this is why I think a really experienced DEI strategist is really useful. Now, there's been a lot of, diversity leaders that have been let go during this last period, and a lot of org transformations. But I think when you have a really good DEI strategist that can create alignment across the business, and then the CEO is better informed of when to speak up and when not to, right? I'll give you a very good example. I just had a wonderful kind of like podcast, but we did it on Zoom. It wasn't as cool as this setup, Clint. But I interviewed her for like an hour and a half on what is she doing with her strategy at Zapier. And it's a tech company, right? And I've got the videos on YouTube, so if anyone wants to go. But with this particular topic, she had a brilliant solution. And because we want people to be able to focus on work. So in their Slack channel, they have work channels, but then they also have topic channels. If you want to go to a topic channel, you do this, but they've really made clear in their communication that you cannot come in and insert a political or social issue in a work channel. You need to let people do work. if other people want to voluntarily go to the other channels and have this conversation. So I thought, what a nice balance between, not banning, because the fact is even if a CEO wants to ban it, you've got employees that want to talk about things, right? So how do you structure something that provides the productivity, that doesn't impact productivity, but then still allows some freedom of communication without it being highly, highly divisive or hijacking people, right? I've just now hijacked this whole work meeting with whatever, right? I think that's the bigger issue. And I just love the simplicity of their approach. And I thought that is actually really brilliant. How smart and how simple, but yet we are so, and that's, I think, the power of a really good DEI strategist, right? That they've said, what do the leaders need? What do you care about? Your priorities are productivity. So it's not a DEI leader saying like, y'all better care about social justice. She's like, I'm here to consult and guide, right? And we're all going to be aligned. And what's the alignment then that we need to pull in? So anyway, it was a 3-part series. It was fascinating talking to her because you rarely see a DEI approach like Zapier's. And I would love to see it more.
Yeah,
but the last session that she and I did, we talked about our professional journeys, and she's in-house and I'm more on the consultative side, right? And kind of how did we learn and build to this? We both have kind of the similar philosophy of especially in these corporate spaces, right? Where your mission is not so much based on an identity or a community, right? So a lot of nonprofits are, and they of course will be stronger in certain DEI sort of activities and things. But for most businesses whose missions are not specifically, anchored in identity, right? I think there are some other approaches that work really well. And we call it a strategy first approach, where you can go in and really look at the embedded strategy and then align and say, okay, what are the things we can do within our business strategy and our industry that where we apply DEI, but we don't have to do everything. And what we've done too, I think, to our leaders is we've exhausted them a bit, right? Because these CEOs are really busy executives. Yeah. We've exhausted them a bit. And I don't think that's always fair to leaders, right? So how do we provide some boundaries where, if I'm an executive, I can assert the influence I need on alignment at my company, but I don't have to solve every single problem in the world,
Yeah.
And I think that, requires empathy. It does. We've got to have some empathy for what we expect out of leaders. I have a hard time with that, though. I will admit, I do have a hard time with what I expect from them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. How is this how has all of this conversation affected InclusionPro, affected you personally, your business? Like, what has this been like? This must be fascinating to be like, this is your whole field and to have it like the whole, the whole national conversations around it.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually, DEI is not the only thing I do. And so I think a lot of people think I only do DEI. And I think certainly on that, I think everybody across the nation understandably has seen, sort of a pulling back, right? And certainly I think internally the work's going strong. So again, the data shows that the work is still strong, but I think hiring consultants, hiring heads of DEI, there's been a little bit of a pause there. My clients, we still do work. Again, they haven't had to change that much, but for me, I think we just follow sort of the ebbs and flows of recessions and high economies, and that's just what it is to be a consultant, I guess. But I've been in professional services for as an attorney for 10 years, so it's not like. And I have to say that I am very fortunate to be able to do projects that I really care about. Like, this report, nobody's paying me to do it, but I really feel like our community can benefit from having some analytical data because nobody else is measuring this, right? And I think it helps keep us all informed and connected in some way, right? But so I am very lucky to be able to say, okay, what is needed in this industry right now, right? And so that's things like data. It's things like deepening our professional bench, providing professional development. Like, I have probably more, years of experience than a lot of DEI professionals. So let's use this time, right, to deepen your skills, your strategic skill sets, and things that I've learned in working with, executive teams. And so, yeah, that's what I use my time for. TEDx Salt Lake City too. I gotta plug. I don't know when this is going to air, but that's on October 7th.
October 7th, TEDx Salt Lake City. Everyone check it out.
It's on Monday evening.
Everyone should check out your speech at TEDx Salt Lake City. It was great.
Yeah, and I don't know if we want to talk about adoption, but there's a lot of stuff going on. PBS just did a huge documentary on the Korean, on the falsified records and things like that. And the AP has done a whole series on it. And so it's been interesting because it's a lot more amazing. China just stopped their adoptions.
Really?
A few weeks ago.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating.
So anyway, but important topic this year, Great Salt Lake, right?
Yeah.
We got Timothy Hawks. His talk's gonna be so awesome. I have, these are the two people I'm coaching, Kimberly Tyder Applewhite, social media, not social media, reality TV from a therapist's viewpoint. So anyway,
is it good to watch?
Just a little teaser. I don't know. You'll have to come watch her talk. I am not gonna spill. You got to come on October 7th and watch their amazing talks. But yeah, that is fun. We put hundreds of hours of work into coaching these speakers, and I love the process, and I love seeing them grow and develop. And then I do a lot of executive coaching and just strategy. And so yeah, I stay busy doing things that I love. I'm still trying to get the Adoptee Citizenship Act passed.
Is that not passed yet? Why not?
Well,
By the way, for context, I know some people may not know, like Sara and I are both adopted.
Yes.
That's kind of a connection that we have.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Yeah. So,
I just wanted to think it was like random that you brought up adoption.
Yeah, totally. And Clint's probably the only one that even cares of anyone who's listening. But yeah, context, older adoptees do not have automatic citizenship, but younger ones do through federal law. So we're trying to fix the law so that automatic citizenship applies. But there's this small word called immigration that's been really, really in the politics and the news and everything. And it's made it especially difficult this year. And
yes, if you could pick a topic even more hot than DEI, you just picked it.
It'd be immigration, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Why do I always end up in this? Oh my gosh. I'm kind of a shut-in in my house. I know all of a sudden, yeah. But yeah, I mean, they're challenging areas right now but I actually really like working in areas that need some problem solving and need some creative thinking. And it's been really fun to work with our Utah, offices and see all the dynamics they have to go through. And but it's just a tough year, but we're still trying to get as much sponsorship as we can, and hopefully that'll pass. But Congress.
Yeah.
And then
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. And then the other thing I'm just involved in is the National Association of Corporate Directors, the Utah chapter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I joined the board last year, and that's it. That is such a great organization for folks who want to learn more about corporate governance, which also applies to nonprofit governance, right? But I've been in lots and lots of nonprofits, but it's not like I took lessons in governance, even though I'm a lawyer, right? By training, but it has been a really great educational experience. So highly recommend it for anyone who is thinking about private board, corporate board, or even building their own board.
Yeah, what a board even does.
Yeah, what do they do? What the some of the messiness, right? What's D&O insurance, right? All that fun stuff.
They can fire Sam Altman, and then they can get fired, and Sam Altman can come back.
Then he can come back and build his own board.
It's very interesting.
It's wild. And then the big, what was that big Microsoft crash that? I can never remember the name, but it basically shut down the world for like 3 days.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, that's a big governance crisis management issue, right? And
CrowdStrike?
CrowdStrike, thank you. Yeah. I just think it's fascinating, like the role of a board and just, what it is that they should be doing, not doing. It's been fun. And it's a great group.
A good board, you probably never know,
What?
right? A good board, it like never makes the news.
Well, I mean, I don't know that CrowdStrike was the board's fault.
Yeah.
But it's going to make the news, right?
Yeah.
And now the board's going to come in and have to, do some cleanup. So
It's kind of everybody's fault.
Yeah, I mean,
and nobody's fault at the same time.
Exactly. It's not always about the board itself. It's about just the things that happen in a company, right? Like, one of our, So anyway, it's just fascinating. And part of me is like, I'm so glad I don't have to be a CEO. Like, it's so hard right now. Like, I think the world is so.
Yeah.
And then AI.
It's uncertain.
It is so uncertain.
It's a very uncertain time. Sara, thanks for everything you do for Utah. Thanks for coming in again. It means a lot. I'm sure we'll have you back many more times in the future. Thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks. And thanks for keeping this topic relevant. And I love the timing because
we'll link to this, by the way, in the show notes.
Oh, thank you. And I want everybody to know this is free. It's not behind an email subscription. It's a free service to the community. We had over 1,000 views of the last report. So I know that people are very interested in what's going on. So thank you. I'm really glad that people care. If I had only gotten 5 views, I guess I'd be like, all right, I'm not going to put any energy into it. But it's been good. And I'm grateful to be in a position where I can hopefully nudge things in the right direction.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sara.